Part 1. The Years of Building. For nearly 20 years, Daniel Mercer built his business brick by brick. He started with nothing more than a rented garage, a folding table, and a stubborn belief that he could create something meaningful. Back then, no one believed in him except his wife, Clara, who used to bring him coffee in chipped mugs and say, "One day this will matter." Daniel repaired and restored old wooden furniture, tables, cabinets, doors, anything people thought was too damaged to save. He believed in restoration, in second chances, in taking what looked broken and revealing its strength. His company, Mercer Woodworks, slowly grew. One client turned into 10, 10 turned into a workshop, the workshop turned into a warehouse. He hired apprentices, then craftsmen, then managers. Over time, Mercer Woodworks became known across the region for quality and integrity. Daniel wasn't just a businessman, he was a mentor. He trained young workers who had no skills and gave them a future. He paid on time. He treated people fairly. He believed loyalty was earned, not demanded. By year 15, the company employed over 80 people. Contracts came from hotels, offices, and luxury homes. His name carried weight. And Daniel believed it would last forever. He believed stability was permanent. Growth was guaranteed. Hard work was protection. He was wrong. What he didn't know was that success sometimes grows so quietly you stop hearing the cracks forming underneath. And when cracks are ignored long enough, they don't stay cracks. They become collapse. Part 2. The Invisible Cracks. Success didn't disappear overnight. It weakened quietly. At first, Daniel dismissed the warning signs. A delayed payment here, a supplier raising prices there, a competitor offering lower bids. Normal business fluctuations, he told his managers. But the market was changing faster than he realized. Cheaper imported furniture flooded stores. Big corporations undercut prices. Clients who once valued craftsmanship began asking only one question: how much cheaper can you do it? Daniel refused to lower standards. "We don't compete on price," he said. "We compete on quality." For years, that philosophy worked. But now, quality alone wasn't enough. Cash flow tightened. Projects slowed. The warehouse felt larger and emptier. Machines hummed less frequently. His accountant approached him one afternoon. "We need to be careful," she said gently. "Margins are shrinking." Daniel nodded, but he wasn't worried. He had survived tough seasons before. He believed reputation would protect him. He believed loyalty would protect him. He believed experience would protect him. He didn't see how deeply the world had shifted. Then came the contract that was supposed to save everything, a massive renovation deal with a hotel chain. If it went through, it would stabilize the company for years. Daniel poured everything into securing it. But at the last minute, the hotel signed with a larger, cheaper competitor. The phone call lasted less than 3 minutes. The silence afterward lasted much longer. That was the moment he first felt it. Not fear, but instability. Like standing on solid ground that suddenly feels hollow. And for the first time in 20 years, Daniel realized the business he thought was unshakable was standing on fragile ground. Part 3. The Fall. The collapse didn't come with an explosion. It came with numbers, spreadsheets, red lines, silence in the accounting office. Over the next 6 months, projects continued to shrink. Clients negotiated harder. 2 long-term partners quietly switched suppliers. Inventory piled up in the warehouse, unsold. Daniel worked longer hours trying to outwork the problem. He called old clients, offered flexible terms, took smaller jobs he would have rejected years ago. But the numbers kept bleeding. One Friday morning, his accountant sat across from him with trembling hands. "If we continue like this," she said carefully, "we won't make payroll in 2 months." The words felt unreal. Payroll. He had never missed it, not once in 20 years. 80 families depended on him. 80. Daniel stared at the wooden desk he had built himself years ago. Smooth oak, strong, reliable, unlike everything else right now. He secured a short-term loan to buy time, sold personal investments, even mortgaged his house quietly without telling Clara at first. He believed he could turn it around, but belief alone couldn't fight market forces, debt interest, and shrinking demand. Then the bank called. Loan extension denied. 2 weeks later, Daniel gathered his employees in the warehouse. The machines were silent behind him. His voice shook for the first time in decades. "I have always promised honesty," he said, "so I won't hide this from you. We cannot continue operations." The words felt like tearing something out of his chest. Some workers stared blankly, others lowered their heads, a few wiped tears. He wasn't just closing a business, he was dismantling years of trust. As employees slowly packed their tools, the warehouse felt like a hollow shell. By the end of the month, Mercer Woodworks officially declared bankruptcy. 20 years. Gone. The sign came down. The doors locked. Daniel stood outside for a long time, staring at the empty building. He had built something real, and now it was dust. For the first time in his life, he felt not like a leader, but like a failure. And that feeling followed him home. Part 4. The Weight of Silence. The house felt different after the closure. Not physically, emotionally. The workshop smell that once followed Daniel home, sawdust and polish, was gone. Now he carried something heavier, quiet shame. He stopped waking up early. For 20 years, he had risen before sunrise. Now he lay in bed staring at the ceiling long after morning had arrived. There was nowhere to go. No warehouse to unlock, no orders to check, no employees waiting for instructions. Just silence. Clara tried to stay strong. She brewed coffee the same way she always had. She asked gentle questions. "What are you thinking about?" "Nothing," he would say. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. He replayed every decision in his mind. Should he have lowered prices? Should he have modernized earlier? Should he have expanded slower? Regret became a constant companion. Some former employees called him, not with anger, but concern. "You gave us everything you had," one of them said. But Daniel didn't feel generous. He felt responsible. Walking through town became uncomfortable. People didn't mock him. They were polite. Too polite. "I'm sorry to hear about the business," they would say. Each time felt like a small cut. At night, he sat in the garage where Mercer Woodworks had once begun. The old folding table was still there, dust-covered, forgotten. It looked smaller than he remembered. For weeks, he did nothing. No plans, no new ideas, just heaviness. The identity he had built for 2 decades, business owner, employer, craftsman, had vanished, and without it, he wasn't sure who he was. But deep beneath the despair, something quiet remained. A memory of the man who had started in this very garage with no guarantees and no safety net. That man had been hungry, bold, unafraid of starting from zero. Daniel wasn't there yet, but the thought lingered. If I built once, could I build again? He wasn't ready to answer, but for the first time since the collapse, he asked the question, and questions are often the first step toward rebuilding. Part 5. The Breaking Point. Winters settled in quietly that year, cold and gray. Daniel felt it in his bones. 3 months had passed since the bankruptcy. The savings were thinner. The mortgage weighed heavily. Bills arrived like reminders of everything he had lost. He avoided former colleagues, avoided business news, avoided mirrors some days. One afternoon, he received a letter from the bank confirming the final liquidation of remaining company assets. It was official, permanent, clinical. Mercer Woodworks no longer existed. He folded the letter slowly and placed it on the kitchen table. That evening, Clara sat across from him in silence before finally speaking. "Daniel," she said gently, "are you done?" He looked up sharply. Done? With trying? The question struck harder than any financial report. "I failed," he said quietly. "No," she replied. "You lost a business. That's not the same as losing yourself." He didn't respond. She continued, steady and calm. "You built something once. You helped families. You created jobs. You mentored people. That doesn't disappear because the market changed." He stared at his hands, strong, worn, capable hands. "I don't even know where to start again." Clara leaned forward. "Start where you began the first time." That night, Daniel went back to the garage. He cleared the dust off the folding table, opened the old toolbox, ran his fingers over the wood. For the first time in months, he didn't feel shame. He felt memory, not of the fall, but of the beginning. Back then, he hadn't had reputation, employees, or contracts. He had skill, experience, resilience, and hunger. Somewhere along the road of success, he had forgotten how powerful those were. The collapse had taken his company, but it hadn't taken his knowledge. It hadn't taken his ability. It hadn't taken his will. Standing alone in the garage, Daniel realized something that shifted everything. He wasn't starting from zero. He was starting from experience. And experience, unlike money, couldn't be taken away. That realization didn't solve his problems, but it did something more important. It lit a small spark. And sparks, if protected, can become fire.
Part 6. A New Perspective. The next morning, Daniel didn't stay in bed. He woke up before sunrise, not because he had to, but because something inside him refused to waste another day. He sat at the folding table in the garage with a notebook. For the first time since the collapse, he wasn't thinking about what he had lost. He was thinking about what he had learned. He wrote down every mistake he believed he had made, ignored market trends, over-relied on large contracts, delayed modernization, focused on quality but not innovation. The list was long. But instead of feeling crushed, he felt clarity. For 20 years, he had been running the business. He had rarely stepped back to rethink it. Now, he had no choice. Later that week, something unexpected happened. One of his former employees, Marcus, stopped by the house. "I heard you were around," Marcus said. "I wanted to say thank you." Daniel was surprised. "For what?" "For teaching me everything I know." Marcus had started his own small restoration service after the company closed. He was doing well, better than expected. "You built more than furniture. You built people." The words stayed with Daniel long after Marcus left. He realized something important. What had truly mattered in his first business wasn't just the products. It was the training, the mentorship, the culture of growth. He had unknowingly created something more valuable than woodwork. He had created capability. That evening, Daniel sat again at the garage table, but this time his notebook contained a new question. What if my next business isn't about furniture? What if it's about helping other businesses avoid the mistakes I made?
He began outlining ideas, consulting for small manufacturers, workshops on modernization, financial strategy for craftsmen, digital marketing training for traditional businesses. He understood both sides, the passion of building something and the pain of watching it collapse. That perspective was rare and valuable. For the first time since bankruptcy, Daniel didn't feel like a fallen businessman. He felt like someone who had survived something, and survivors carry wisdom. The collapse had stripped away his old identity, but in doing so, it had revealed a new possibility. He wouldn't rebuild what he lost. He would build something smarter, stronger, more adaptive. And this time, he wouldn't just create a company. He would create impact. The spark was no longer small. It was steady. Part 7. The first step forward. Ideas are comforting. Action is terrifying. Daniel knew that if he truly wanted to start again, he couldn't stay in the garage writing plans. He had to step back into the world, the same world that had watched him fall. His first step was simple. He called 3 small workshop owners he knew personally, not to ask for money, not to sell anything, just to listen. "Tell me what's hardest right now," he asked each of them. The answers were familiar. Rising costs, unpredictable clients, confusion about digital marketing, fear of taking loans. Daniel recognized the pattern immediately. These were the same pressures that had once quietly weakened his own company. But unlike before, he wasn't defensive. He was observant. Over the next 2 weeks, he visited workshops across the region. He sat in small offices, stood beside dusty machines, and asked questions. He didn't present himself as an expert. He presented himself as someone who had learned the hard way. Word spread quickly. Daniel Mercer was offering free business audits for small craftsmen. Some were skeptical, some were curious, but many were struggling, and struggling people are open to guidance. After analyzing a handful of operations, Daniel noticed common mistakes: outdated pricing models, no online presence, no cost tracking systems. He drafted simple improvement plans for each owner: clear steps, practical advice, no complicated theory. The results surprised even him. One workshop improved cash flow within a month. Another gained new clients after launching a basic website. A third reduced waste and saved thousands. Daniel began receiving calls. "Can you look at my numbers too? Can you show my team how to calculate margins?" He wasn't charging yet, but something was happening. For the first time since his collapse, he felt useful again. Not as a manufacturer, but as a guide. Clara noticed the change. "You're smiling again," she said one evening. Daniel didn't even realize it. He had stepped back into the arena, not as the same man who left, but as someone wiser. He understood now that strength wasn't avoiding failure, it was surviving it. And as requests continued to grow, Daniel realized something powerful. This wasn't charity, it was the foundation of a new business. He just needed the courage to formalize it, to step fully into this new identity and charge for the value he was creating. Because impact is meaningful, but sustainability makes impact last. Daniel was ready to build again, this time differently. Part 8. Charging for value. The hardest shift wasn't rebuilding. It was believing he deserved to be paid again. Daniel had spent months helping workshop owners for free. Part of him felt he owed the world something after his failure. But Clara challenged that thinking gently. "You're not repaying a debt," she told him. "You're creating value." He knew she was right. So he made a decision that felt both small and enormous. He printed simple business cards. Daniel Mercer, Business Strategy for Traditional Crafts and Manufacturing. No fancy branding, no large office, just a phone number and an email address. He set a modest consulting fee, lower than most professional advisors, not because his knowledge lacked value, but because he wanted accessibility. The first client to officially hire him was a second-generation metal fabricator named Thomas. Their meeting lasted 4 hours. Daniel reviewed financial statements, supplier contracts, and marketing strategies. When Thomas handed him a check at the end of the session, Daniel hesitated for half a second. Then he accepted it. Not with shame, but with quiet confidence. Within 3 months, he had 6 paying clients. Within 6 months, 12. He wasn't making the revenue he once had with Mercer Woodworks, not yet, but the structure was different this time. No expensive warehouse, no heavy machinery, no massive loans, low overhead, high expertise. He invested time in studying modern business trends, digital tools, automation software, and lean operations. He wasn't repeating the mistake of ignoring change. He embraced it. He built simple online resources for clients, hosted small workshops in rented conference rooms, taught owners to read their numbers, not just trust them. What surprised him most was how much stronger he felt inside. The collapse had humbled him, but it had also sharpened him. He no longer feared risk blindly, he measured it. He no longer believed growth was automatic, he engineered it. And as client businesses began improving, testimonials followed. Daniel saved our company. We avoided bankruptcy because of his strategy. You should talk to Mercer. The name that once carried the weight of failure was now associated with recovery. Daniel understood something deeply now. His old business built furniture. His new business built resilience. And resilience, unlike wood, didn't decay easily. For the first time since the bankruptcy, he didn't just feel stable, he felt stronger than before. This wasn't a comeback, it was an evolution, and it was only the beginning. Part 9. Scaling the Vision. Daniel quickly realized something important. If he continued working one-on-one with every client, he would eventually hit a ceiling. Time was limited. Impact didn't have to be. The thought reminded him of his first company. He had built systems there, processes that allowed 80 people to work efficiently. Why not apply the same thinking to this new venture? Instead of simply advising individual business owners, he began designing structured programs. A 12-week recovery framework for struggling workshops, a modernization blueprint for traditional manufacturers, a financial clarity course for first-time entrepreneurs. He recorded training videos in his garage at first, the same garage where everything had begun, twice. The folding table now held a laptop instead of woodworking tools. It felt symbolic. Daniel launched his first small group program with 8 business owners. They met weekly, shared numbers, discussed challenges, and held each other accountable. The transformation was powerful. They weren't just learning from Daniel, they were learning from each other. By the end of the program, 2 businesses had doubled their monthly profit margins. One avoided shutting down entirely, another expanded to a second location. Daniel saw something bigger than consulting. He saw community. The collapse of his first company had been lonely, painfully isolating. Now he was creating an environment where no business owner had to struggle alone. He formalized his new company under a new name, Resilient Growth Partners. The name meant something to him. Growth wasn't enough. It had to survive pressure. As demand increased, Daniel hired a small support team, a program coordinator, a marketing specialist, and eventually another consultant trained under his guidance. He was building again. But this time, he built with awareness. No reckless expansion. No overdependence on a single contract. Multiple revenue streams, digital platforms, diversified clients. He applied every lesson learned from failure. And something remarkable happened. Within 3 years, Resilient Growth Partners surpassed the annual revenue Mercer Woodworks had once achieved. But the difference wasn't just financial. Daniel wasn't chasing stability anymore. He was building sustainability.
And with every entrepreneur he helped survive and thrive, his own strength deepened. He understood now that collapse hadn't destroyed him, it had refined him. The man who once stood outside a locked warehouse in despair would not recognize the leader he was becoming.
Part 10. The Test of Strength. Success returned, but this time, Daniel didn't celebrate too quickly. He had learned that growth without discipline invites danger. Resilient growth partners expanded steadily. Online courses attracted clients beyond his region. Webinars filled with entrepreneurs from different cities, even different countries. Testimonials poured in. But Daniel never forgot the feeling of standing in an empty warehouse. So he built safeguards. Every quarter, the company reviewed financial stability. Every new program was tested before scaling. Every expansion was calculated. His team sometimes laughed gently at his caution. "We're doing great," his coordinator would say. "You can relax." Daniel would smile. "I can be proud," he replied, "but I won't be careless." Then came an unexpected challenge. An economic slowdown hit several industries. Some of his clients panicked. Contracts froze. Investment paused. Fear returned to the market. 3 years earlier, this kind of tension might have shaken him deeply. Now it activated him. Instead of retreating, Daniel created emergency workshops, short, focused sessions teaching crisis management, cost restructuring, and adaptive marketing. He made some sessions free for struggling businesses. He knew what desperation felt like. He refused to watch others fall without support. The result surprised everyone. Rather than losing clients, demand increased. Business owners weren't just looking for advice, they were looking for steady leadership. Daniel had become that steady presence. The crisis didn't slow his company, it strengthened its reputation. For the first time, he truly understood something powerful. His greatest asset wasn't strategy, it wasn't experience, it wasn't even knowledge, it was emotional endurance. He no longer feared downturns, he understood them. And because he had survived collapse once, he carried calm where others carried panic. The man who once doubted his worth now stood confidently in front of hundreds of entrepreneurs, teaching resilience not as theory, but as lived truth. His income surpassed anything he had earned before, but more importantly, his influence grew. And influence, when used wisely, multiplies impact. Daniel no longer defined himself by the business he had lost. He defined himself by the strength he had gained. And deep inside, he knew. The collapse had not been the end of his story. It had been the turning point. Part 11. Building a Legacy. By now, Daniel had learned that true success isn't measured in revenue alone. It's measured in the lives you touch, the systems you strengthen, and the people you empower. Resilient Growth Partners wasn't just a consultancy anymore. It had become a network. Workshops, online communities, mentorship programs, hundreds of small business owners were now connected, learning from each other, sharing resources, and supporting one another. Daniel often visited clients in person. He traveled to factories, small towns, and workshops across the region. Everywhere he went, he was greeted with respect, gratitude, and sometimes tears. Owners told him stories of how their businesses had survived downturns, created jobs, or even allowed them to support their children's education, all because of his guidance. One day, Daniel received a call from a former employee of Mercer Woodworks, now running a successful furniture business of his own. "Daniel," he said, "I just want you to know, everything you taught me, every lesson, every warning, it saved me, and I'm passing it on to my team." That was a pivotal moment for Daniel. He realized that the impact of his work could ripple far beyond the immediate business. He wasn't just helping companies survive. He was shaping a culture of resilience, responsibility, and mentorship. Back in the office, he started implementing internal programs to train young consultants the same way he had trained his first employees at Mercer Woodworks. He wanted the lessons he had learned, both from triumph and collapse, to become a permanent part of his organization. For Daniel, this was the true meaning of a legacy. Not the buildings, not the wealth, not even the accolades. The legacy was the growth he could foster in others, the skills he could instill, and the failures he could help them avoid. He finally understood that the collapse he once feared had been a gift in disguise. It forced him to reassess, rebuild smarter, and understand the deeper purpose of business: to empower, to sustain, and to leave the world better than you found it. That night, Daniel sat in his office, looking at the skyline through the glass windows. He didn't feel the anxiety he once had about the next quarter or the next contract. He felt purpose, and with purpose, he knew he could withstand anything. The man who once stood in despair at the ruins of his company had become a guide, a mentor, and a builder of legacies. Part 12. The Moment of Doubt. Even with success returning, Daniel knew that life didn't stop testing resilience. It happened quietly, in the middle of a busy week. A new client, a mid-sized manufacturing company, had been promised a transformation. Daniel and his team worked tirelessly, analyzing processes, cutting waste, and redesigning operations. 3 weeks in, the client's main investor pulled funding unexpectedly. Suddenly, the project stalled. Payments were delayed, morale dipped, and the client questioned every recommendation Daniel made. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the old familiar panic creeping in. His heart raced. Thoughts of his old bankruptcy whispered at the edges of his mind. What if this happens again? What if all this is lost? Clara noticed his tension that evening. "Talk to me," she said. "I can't fail them," Daniel admitted, his voice tight. "If this project collapses, it could ruin their business and reflect badly on us. It could—" He trailed off. "Daniel," Clara said, firm but kind, "remember what you taught them. You didn't survive bankruptcy by panicking. You survived by seeing clearly, analyzing calmly, and acting decisively. Do that now." Her words were like a cold breeze cutting through the fog. The next morning, Daniel gathered his team. They broke down the problems, identified the core issues, and designed contingency strategies. Instead of waiting for the client to panic, they became proactive. They worked with suppliers, renegotiated deadlines, and developed phased solutions. Within a month, the project was back on track. The client's trust returned, payments were stabilized, and Daniel realized something profound. It wasn't the absence of crisis that defined success. It was the ability to respond with clarity under pressure. This was a lesson he now taught his clients constantly. Setbacks are inevitable, but collapse is optional. For Daniel, this moment reinforced a truth he had learned twice in his life. Strength isn't built in comfort, it's forged in crisis. The man who once crumbled under the weight of failure now understood that challenges were not enemies. They were teachers, shaping the resilience that had become the foundation of his new business. Part 13. Expanding the impact. With renewed confidence, Daniel began thinking bigger. He realized that his work didn't have to be limited to local workshops and manufacturers. The knowledge he had gained, both from building and losing a company, could help business owners nationwide. He launched a structured online platform alongside his consultancy. Video tutorials, step-by-step guides, webinars, and forums allowed him to reach hundreds of entrepreneurs at once. Business owners who could never afford one-on-one consultations now had access to his strategies. Daniel also started hosting live virtual sessions where he shared real-life case studies, including his own failures. He spoke openly about the collapse of Mercer Woodworks, the despair that followed, and the lessons that led him to rebuild. The response was overwhelming. People connected to his honesty. Many sent messages saying, "I almost gave up, but hearing your story gave me hope." One young entrepreneur wrote, "I was ready to close my workshop. After following your steps, I've regained clients, cut costs, and even hired another employee. You saved my business." Daniel began collaborating with business schools and vocational programs. He ran training workshops for students who wanted to start their own companies. He taught them practical strategies, but more importantly, he taught them resilience, the ability to rise after failure, the mindset to persevere when systems fail. His team grew as well. He trained senior consultants to carry his philosophy forward. Each new hire was not only skilled in business strategy, but also trained in mentorship, empathy, and the culture of lifting others while growing oneself. By the end of 2 years, Resilient Growth Partners had impacted hundreds of businesses, saving jobs and revitalizing industries. Daniel's approach became a model: growth paired with mentorship, success paired with responsibility. He realized that the collapse of his first company had been more than a challenge. It was a preparation. Mercer Woodworks had ended, but the lessons from it had become the foundation of something far greater, a business that didn't just survive, but multiplied the potential of others. Daniel's influence now extended far beyond profit. He was creating a ripple effect, businesses that thrived because he had once learned to rise from ruin. Part 14: Recognition and Fulfillment. Daniel's work began attracting attention beyond the immediate business community. Industry publications highlighted Resilient Growth Partners as a model for rebuilding after failure. Podcasts invited him to share his story. Awards came not for revenue or scale, but for impact, mentorship, and innovation. For Daniel, the recognition was secondary. What mattered most was seeing the tangible difference he made. A client who had once faced bankruptcy now employed 10 people. Another launched a second branch, creating opportunities for families that might otherwise have struggled. One afternoon, Daniel received a letter from a former employee of Mercer Woodworks, now running a successful furniture company. "Daniel," it read, "I want to thank you. You taught me more than craftsmanship. You taught me resilience. Your guidance helped me grow my business and mentor others. You changed my life." Reading those words, Daniel felt something he hadn't in years: pure fulfillment. He reflected on the journey, the collapse of his first company, the months of despair, the struggle to rebuild, and finally the creation of a business that was stronger, smarter, and more meaningful than anything he had imagined. Clara found him on the terrace that evening, gazing at the sunset. "You're smiling," she said. "I'm proud," Daniel admitted, "not of what I've earned, but of what I've helped others achieve." He realized that failure had been a teacher he could never have paid for. It had humbled him, sharpened him, and forced him to innovate in ways success alone never could. Daniel understood now that true fulfillment wasn't wealth, recognition, or growth alone. It was the ability to create a legacy, one that outlasted him, impacted lives, and gave others the tools to succeed. He wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was a guide, a mentor, and a builder of resilience. And that realization filled him with a calm, steady joy he had never known in his first years of success. Part 15: Stronger Than Before. Years after the collapse, Daniel Mercer stood at the helm of a company that was not only profitable but transformative. Resilient Growth Partners had grown into a network of consultants, trainers, and mentors, all committed to helping small and mid-sized businesses thrive. Daniel often reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had been a man who built something magnificent, watched it crumble, and felt the weight of despair. He had known what it meant to lose stability, reputation, and security. But through that pain, he had learned the most important lessons: resilience, adaptability, and the true meaning of leadership. Now, Daniel wasn't just guiding businesses, he was shaping futures. He held workshops for young entrepreneurs, trained new consultants, and partnered with schools to teach business resilience as part of vocational programs. Every story of a business saved, every job preserved, every entrepreneur inspired, it became a testament to his journey. One evening, after a long day of training sessions and consultations, Daniel sat quietly in his office. The city lights shimmered outside the window, reflecting the distance he had traveled, from the despair of losing everything to the triumph of building something even stronger. Clara joined him, smiling. "You've done more than I ever imagined," she said softly. Daniel nodded. "I lost once," he admitted, "but losing taught me how to create something greater. And now, every business we help, every life we impact, it reminds me why it was worth it to start over." He realized that the collapse of Mercer Woodworks had been a turning point, not the end. It had forced him to rebuild smarter, lead with empathy, and focus on lasting impact. The lessons of failure had become the foundation of enduring success. Daniel understood the truth most people never grasp. Strength isn't measured by what you achieve when life is easy. Strength is measured by how you rise when life falls apart. And rise he did. Stronger, wiser, more capable, and more generous than ever. His business no longer just created profits, it created hope, opportunities, and resilience. The man who had once feared failure had become someone who could guide others through it, and in doing so, he became unstoppable.